welcome to that of Nicole. My objective for the rest of the afternoon is to spend an hour and a half keeping people as intensively involved in the meeting as possible. It's a little more difficult with a virtual meeting, but it allows us to take part from all over the world, which is a great advantage that the pandemic has brought. So we'll zoom ahead as fast as we can, but please feel free to contribute in either of the ways that Nicole has suggested, to comment on the points that are being covered in the presentations, or if you want under the Q&A session to ask something completely different which isn't covered in the agenda. We can deal with any other business in that way. I very much hope that you'll enjoy the meeting and that you'll come back again for the next General Council meeting, which I hope will not be quite so long delayed as the interval between this meeting and the last meeting. The next, can I make a particular welcome, give a particular welcome to the new rector of the university, about whom we'll hear a little more later, but a newly elected rector of the university is a very welcome participant. The second item on the agenda is the minutes of the 314th meeting. I haven't chaired them all, but this is our 314th meeting, and I would invite anyone with any problems with the minutes to put something in the chat function or to raise your hand, and Nicole will bring you into the discussion. But unless anyone has anything particular to say, we can perhaps approve the last minutes. I'll pause for people to dissent from that if they want to. Okay, the next item is the Business Committee report. Now, normally I report orally, but partly because of the format, and partly to release airtime for other people to speak, I've put that in writing, and I would be very happy to answer questions either immediately at the end of this item or under the Q&A session that's item 7 on the agenda. The only thing that I would add to what I've written is in paragraph 10, you'll see that we've succeeded in widening the membership of the Business Committee, which acts on behalf of the General Council in between General Council meetings. And we were absolutely delighted to welcome our first 2 members from overseas, another payoff of the ability to hold virtual meetings, or as we did in November, a mixed meeting, a hybrid meeting. So I would encourage those of you who are interested and who are perhaps intrigued by the content of this meeting to put yourself forward in the summer for election to the Business Committee. The membership of the Business Committee rotates each year. Each year, some of us retire and are up for a replacement. That's all that I wanted to add to the report. Are people content to note the report, or are there any immediate questions as distinct from questions that can be covered under item 7?
As I say, Nigel, I see you've raised your hand there. Would you be able to type into the chat box, or you can wait until the Q&A session? It's up to yourself. We can maybe move on, Duncan, and I can read out Nigel's question shortly.
Yes. Incidentally, I can't see my own image. Can you see it? I don't see my camera. Sorry?
Yes, I can indeed.
Okay. Right. I look quite normal, do I?
You do, yes.
Yes. Okay. The next section action, the next item on the agenda, is an update on what's happening in the university, with particular reference to the way the university's coped with the pandemic. And Tracy Slavin, who's the Secretary and Chief Operating Officer, is going to give that update. But first, I would like to say that the Business Committee, which has had presentations at each meeting on how the university is faring, has been very impressed with the way that the university has reacted to the unprecedented circumstances of the pandemic. But otherwise, can I hand over to Tracy?
Hoping that you can. Hello.
Yes, you're sitting in an empty lecture hall, a seminar room. Yeah.
It's my office, but it's a little bit empty.
Okay. Well, welcome to the meeting.
Thank you, Duncan, and lovely to be involved with the General Council meeting again. It's interesting in reflecting and thinking about this report, in that it's also only just past the anniversary of my joining the university, so it's a nice reflection point for me as well. And so my focus is in part on the calendar year. It has been exceptionally busy, as the university has had to continue to deal with the impacts of the COVID pandemic, and the rather more frequently than we might have anticipated, changing restrictions and guidance to the sector on how we should operate. But certainly I'm approaching the start of this calendar year with the hope that we are now heading towards perhaps not post-COVID, but living with COVID, and the hope of relaxation of the restrictions, so that we can start to really engage with staff and students on campus in a way that we haven't been able to do through much of the last year. Though I have to say, the implementation of those COVID restrictions from staff and students, and I have to offer huge thanks for the way in which we've had resilience, compliance, and enthusiasm about continuing to deliver education and research, has meant that we have gone through the pandemic to date with really clear evidence that we haven't had transmission in teaching and research environments, which I think is a huge credit to all of the efforts that have been put into that. And that relaxation that we did have in the third quarter of last year meant that we were able to hold our first graduations in person since the start of the pandemic, and that was absolutely fabulous. Out at the Teca to take forward our autumn graduations here, but also out in Qatar as well. So being able to reconnect with that student and staff body over there was absolutely fabulous. Through the year, we've had lots of change and development on the governance side of the university as well. Some highlights I thought might be useful to reflect on are the election of a new senior governor in May this year. That's Julie Ashworth. And thanks, of course, to Nuala Booth, who is a member of General Council, for her period as acting chair, acting senior governor, and really taking us through that process. We've also been joined this year by 4 new independent members in September. That followed the demitting of office of David McFarlane, Jenny Sheriffs, Nuala Booth and Colin Duncan. And they've been succeeded by Charlotte Pope-Williams, Robert Trenham, Otto Thorensen and Karen Miller, 2 of whom are also graduates of the university and hence General Council members, thus maintaining that connection. And of course, we have developed a new protocol which we're in the process of implementing, whereby we will have rebuild that bridge between court members and the General Council's Business Committee. We also, as usual, had turnover in our sabbatical, student members of court, with new members Elisa Costa and Camilo Torres Barragan joining us as well. And then last but not least, following a short break in which we didn't have a rector, as Duncan said at the top of the meeting, we had the election in November with Martina Chikwama Ezeki joining us as rector, taking up her role from the 1st of January. And I'm looking forward to really having a fantastic installation ceremony for her in March this year, which we would encourage everyone to engage with, really trying to broaden our community involvement as we get back to something closer to normality, we hope, and a little bit of warmer weather than trying to do it in January. So there was a couple of motivations for that slight change in plan, but I think we would look forward to something that really is an opportunity for staff, students, alumni and others to come together when we're doing that. So the business for court over the year ahead will see the implementation of both the governance review and our Senate effectiveness review, both of which we've now accepted the recommendations, but really looking forward to making sure that we support the engagement of our community in a really connected and smooth flowing governance ecosystem going forward. So while I've been busy with lots of governance activity, we shouldn't, of course, forget that throughout the last year, colleagues have continued to produce world-leading research on COVID and its impacts, but also delivering across the spectrum of activity. And I'm hugely pleased to be able to share with any of you who haven't heard so far that the university will be receiving next month a Queen's Award for Higher Education for the work of the teams on soil science and climate change. It's a fantastic recognition, and it's hugely unusual for a university to receive Queen's Awards, but also a Queen's Award in such close succession to our last award as well. And I think that really articulates just how strong that work is. And that's also reflected, I think, in the efforts of staff across the university, and is starting to get in that external recognition that we all hope that it should. University is now, for the first time, in the top 20 of 2 of the key league tables in the UK, The Guardian and the Sunday Times. And we've hit our highest ever spot, 158th in the Times Global League tables as well. But it's not just about the reputation of our research. Our student experience is also obviously incredibly important to us, and we moved to being 5th in the NSS. Despite COVID, that was a real move relative to the rest of the sector, so incredibly pleased to see that, but of course not complacent, and fully recognise the challenges that our students have faced over the last 3 years now in terms of interrupted education, and the challenge indeed that we'll see for first years start thinking about joining us in September, who've had most of their senior phase of education at school disrupted as well. Moving on then to give you a little bit of news about student recruitment. Really pleased that recruitment has remained buoyant. Despite all of the predictions from commentators that students wouldn't want to join university, the positivity around online learning and the desire to come to campus as much as they possibly can has been clear in both our domestic and our international recruitment, such that over the last year we had a 6.8% growth in our student population, and of course we've been investing in academic staff to support the student staff ratios at the same time. For those students who haven't quite managed to make it to campus, we're really hoping that they will get here in January for the start of semester, the half session on the 24th, but if not, then as closely thereafter as they possibly can. For those of you who really enjoy a good deep read and some real coverage of some of the highlights of the last year, I can confirm that the university's annual report for the academic year 2020 to 21 is now published on the university website. It is a really good read in terms of articulating where we are, but what it also does in the accounts section is to confirm that despite all of the difficulties of the pandemic period, the university has managed, through really careful management, the support from Scottish Government to address some of the impacts of COVID, and some really good outturns in terms of student recruitment, to return a surplus for the third year in a row, which is very, very positive. So an underlying surplus of just over £8 million in the last academic year. Looking forward, into the future, obviously a lot of work to continue to do moving forward on our research and teaching agenda, but also with the appointment of our Vice Principal, Regional Engagement and Regional Recovery, recognising our role in and civic responsibilities in the region, and working closely with partner institutions and with industry and education. That ties really nicely with the publication by the Scottish Funding Council around coherent and sustainable tertiary education, and the soft launch and decision so far, that we expect it to be further publicised, around the North East acting as a pathfinder for how tertiary institutions, so in our case ourselves, RGU and NESCOL, can work together to look at both pathways for students, but also how we articulate and support an agenda which supports regional recovery and transformation. And I think I'll probably stop there. Lots in that, but very happy, of course, to take any questions in the session later on.
Thanks very much, Tracy. And if I could just underline one of the things that Tracy said, I attended two of the graduation ceremonies in November, and had a chance informally to chat to graduates in the ante room afterwards, and they were to a surprising degree enthusiastic about the staging of the graduation and their ability to take part in the graduation, but also about the experience that they had as students in Aberdeen. They were no less positive about their COVID-affected experience of Aberdeen than I was about my non-COVID and slightly long ago student experience. So it was really good. Now, we've got plenty of time for questions at this stage, if people have them for Tracy. I think the Nicole instructions were to put them in the chat. So I'll leave a moment or two silent for people to contribute in that way to questions to Tracy, but there'll be, as I said before, an opportunity under item 7 to do so orally.
Just a reminder, everyone, if you haven't opened the chat box yet, you can access it by clicking the purple tab, that's on the right hand corner of your screen, and that will open up the Collaborate panel, and you just click on the speech bubble, and then you can type in any questions or comments you've got there.
there's been a sort of welcome to Martina series of chat contributions, but no actual questions. So shall we move on to item 5 about alumni relations and regular giving update? I was particularly keen, as I think I said in my report, to include this item because alumni relations has been transformed during the pandemic, sparing the blushes of Katrina and Nicole. I've been amazed at the diversity of things that they've put on in the very professional way that Nicole has handled this meeting. It's been a delight to take part in some of these diverse occasions. For instance, a tour of the Botanic Gardens under snow, which was a challenge to the curator of the garden, but he did extraordinarily well. And I think a year passed, mulled wine, including a recipe for mulled wine at Christmas time, including a recipe of how to make your own mulled wine, which I still have and have used since. So all human life was there. But I felt it important to give Katrina this opportunity to talk a bit about what alumni relations have been up to. Now, to some extent, this will be a commercial, I bet. But there's a serious point too. You don't have to contribute to the university to attend the amazing performances that Alumni Relations organise. Katrina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Duncan, and hello to everyone joining us today. As Duncan says, I'm Katrina Allen, Head of Alumni Relations and Regular Giving for the University. I'm so pleased to be here to provide a brief update on our activities. So I want to start by giving a brief outline of what I want to talk about today. Firstly, our initial response to COVID-19, and then the changes that have taken place to our activities as a result of the ongoing pandemic, and then finish with some highlights from last calendar year 2021. And I'm of course happy to take any questions that any of you might have afterwards. So as COVID-19 began to take hold around the world, our carefully planned alumni programming essentially had to go out the window. Events were cancelled, planned emails were no longer appropriate or relevant, and of course, by mid-March, almost all university staff were working from home, and then the national lockdown came into force. So what this slide outlines is our initial response across those initial months of March, April, and May. We issued messages of support to our alumni. We provided an update from George Boyne, our Principal and Vice Chancellor. We worked with colleagues across the university to enlist alumni volunteers for student support. We celebrated on social media our alumni's individual contributions to the COVID-19 response. And of course, we launched our emergency fundraising appeal to support students affected financially by the pandemic, raising over £325,000 to date. And so once we were over the initial response phase, as it were, we needed to think about what next. And it became clear quite quickly that COVID-19 was forcing organisations, professions, entire industries even to change the way in which they worked. And that wasn't only in the immediate term, but the medium to long term. And of course, we here in Alumni Relations and Regular Giving was no different to that. We had to adapt the way we worked. But we soon realised it was less about what we did and more about how we did it. And as you can see here, the core elements of our programming didn't change. It was about how they were executed. We knew that we have a unique value proposition connecting our alumni to their alma mater, and that didn't have to change, but we did have to change the way in which we operated, and that was for the longer term, not just the immediate. So alumni relations as a profession, it's perhaps no surprise, has traditionally relied on in-person events as the cornerstone of its efforts. And we actually had plans at the very start of 2020 to introduce a virtual element to our programming. But COVID-19 forced us to do in a month or so what would probably have taken us a year or otherwise, a year or longer to implement otherwise. And almost everything we've done, bar a couple of very small in-person on-campus reunion activities in early autumn of 2021, almost everything has been virtual. reaching more alumni than ever. And our YouTube recordings mean that they can be played back at leisure if the timing of the live event doesn't suit. Matching alumni volunteering support to immediate university needs has become much more flexible. For example, providing that pastoral support to students who had to isolate in halls very suddenly. And we've also learned that generally our engaged alumni enjoy hearing from us more regularly. So we are appearing in their inboxes more often and posting on social media more frequently. So to illustrate the impact of the changes we've made, I thought I would take our events as an example because it's a very clear example. You can see here that pre-COVID, our in-person events during the year 2018-19, so that's August 2018 to July 2019, totaled 45, which was an impressive number of in-person events, engaging 1,796 alumni. But you compare this to the full post-COVID academic year, as it were, 2020-2021, where the number of events totaled 40. We engaged almost 45,000 alumni and others across live interactions and playbacks of our events combined. And another thing to note, which Duncan alluded to earlier, is that the virtual nature of our events means that even more academic colleagues and other colleagues across the entire university can participate in engagement events and bring their fascinating expertise to our alumni in a way that we've never been able to before. So the range of topics that we've been able to offer has been incredible. So what for the future? Well, virtual events have worked extremely well for us and our alumni, so we will continue to run them for sure. But eventually we will want to arrive at a more blended approach, which balances in-person events that offer deeper interpersonal connections with our virtual events programming. On the alumni volunteering front, we know that our alumni are willing to help students however they can and can add to the really excellent work that's undertaken by our colleagues in student support and across the schools. So we want to be more flexible and responsive to these emerging needs as they appear. We also need to be aware that students who have had a different student experience to most of our alumni due to the pandemic may interact with us differently when they become our alumni, and so that's something we need to be mindful of as we move forward. And finally, I just wanted to finish by sharing some figures highlighting our successes of last year, so that's 2021. Our planning year runs 1st of August to 31st of July, like our financial year, but we like as a team to finish for the festive break with a summary of what we've achieved throughout the calendar year. And the team has actually presented this along with some additional stats as a really lovely infographic, but unfortunately I can't share it here in a way that makes the detail clear enough for you to see. But I believe, and Nicole can correct me if I'm wrong, that we will try and share that with you all by email after the meeting. So thanks to the excellent team of colleagues here in Alumni Relations and Regular Giving, and indeed across the entire Directorate of Development and Alumni Relations, we saw some tremendous results across 2021, including the £52,740 raised by our community fundraisers, £516,000 raised through regular giving donors. We were able, as a result of that support, to financially support over 300 students thanks to that alumni generosity. We enlisted over 500 alumni volunteers to help with student support, being part of our award-winning From Aberdeen To campaign and the provision of work placements to students. And of course, our collaboration with alumni-founded Porter's Gin. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say for today. Thank you so much for your attention. And of course, as I said before, I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much, Katrina. I loved the statistic that there were 1,500 people at in-person graduations and 1,496 signed up for the email list. A very important point, because the General Council is enormous, all past graduates and some others, but we can only keep in touch with them if we have a contact now, typically an email address. So it's really important to do that. And I hope that those present at the meeting can spread the word about how useful it is, how rewarding it is to be part of the alumni network at Aberdeen. The thing that impressed me in the last slide was the 300 plus students who were helped by the entirely new, I think, COVID recovery fund, because students have faced new pressures, financial pressures among others, and it's good that that alumni have been able to buckle to and help as many as 300 plus. Now, questions in the chat. Mostly folk are saying remarkable work, well done to you all, kind of thing, rather than asking questions, which is very very valuable in itself. But are there any questions to Katrina at the moment? Okay, there will, as I've said before, be opportunities under item 7 to have a less typed in chance to ask questions. Right, our next item, as I said in my report, the Business Committee selected, because of the outstandingly good work that's been done in a vitally important field of strategic planning for the university, a very inclusive job drawing up the strategic plan, and the General Council through the Business Committee was able to contribute to that process. And it was lovely to see, oh no, I'll not steal Hulda's thunder, but she's got something to boast about. So I'd like to hand over to Hulda and Ian to give their report on strategic planning in the university, the Aberdeen 2040 strategic plan. The floor is yours, Hulda and Ian.
Thank you, Duncan, and hello everyone, and thank you for inviting us to come and speak to the General Council about Aberdeen 2040. So I'm Hulda Sveinsdóttir, I'm Director of Planning, and I've got with me Ian Grant, who's my Head of Strategic Planning. And I'm going to take you through the first few slides around the developmental process for the strategy, and then I'll hand over to Ian, who will then go through more around the implementation of the strategy. So just briefly on the background for the strategy, as you'll know, we had a 5-year strategy between 2015 and 2020, which is very much the norm in the sector. 5-year plans is what most universities use presently. But in January 2019, shortly after George Boyne came in as principal, we started preparing the development of a new strategy 2020 onwards. And it was decided that this would be a very different type of strategy, setting out our strategy and vision for the next 20 years. So it's quite an innovative approach, I think, in the higher education sector in the UK. Development of the strategy took a full year and started in January 2019. Ian, my head of strategic planning, was seconded full-time to support George and Carl, our senior vice principal, and the senior management team in developing the strategy. And it was then approved by University Court in December 2019, so a full year passed. And then we formally launched the strategy, Aberdeen 2040, in February 2020, just before the pandemic hit. Throughout academic year 2020 to 21, we were developing the implementation plan and the key performance indicators, focusing on the development of action plans for each commitment and performance indicator at school level. And then in September last year, University Court approved the new key performance indicators, and so we were all set for implementation. So in terms of development of the strategy, it's worth noting that it was a very collaborative approach while deciding what the strategy should be about. So we set up formal work streams to develop the 4 themes of the strategy. Staff and students were invited to apply to co-chair the work streams. We had consultations, workshops, open sessions, a strategic away day with senior management and university court, interviews with internal and external stakeholders, and we set up a dedicated website, and then we had a dedicated email address for people to submit suggestions and ideas. So the resulting strategy had 4 themes, 5 interdisciplinary societal challenges, and then 20 commitments. And so it was a highly engaged process, which didn't just rely on a short consultation process with staff and students like often happens in the sector. The staff survey that was done by the university in autumn 2020 demonstrated the success, with 92% of our staff agreeing that the senior management team had set out a clear vision, and 91% of staff identified with the commitment set out in Aberdeen 2040. And as you can see on the slide, that's a huge improvement from what we'd seen previously with the previous strategy. And we were very pleased then in June last year that we won the HESPA's annual strategy award. HESPA is the Association for Strategic Planners in Higher Education in the whole of UK. So it was quite a positive thing for the university to have our strategy acknowledged in this way. But I'm now going to hand over to Ian, who will take you through the monitoring process of Aberdeen 2040.
Thank you, Hulda, and thank you, Duncan, just for the opportunity to come and speak to this group. So as Hulda said, I'm just going to take you through the implementation process that we've been working up over the last 2 years, really, since we launched Aberdeen 2040. We launched it back in March 2020, just before the onset of the pandemic. And at that time, as Hulda's touched upon in one of her previous slides there, the idea had been to develop a 5-year implementation plan to cover that first window of time, if you like, that 5-year block of the 20-year window that the strategy spans. However, because of COVID, we opted instead that year, because of the havoc, if you like, created by COVID, plan which focused on a narrower set of commitments. Sorry, something happened there. For 2021-22, we then focused on developing that 5-year plan, which became a 4-year plan, still working towards that 2025 horizon. And what we produced is an implementation plan to 2025, which includes 4-year high-level actions for every commitment. And against each of those high-level actions spanning the 4-year window, we have 1-year activities to be taken forward, and they're refreshed every year, and in effect they make up an annual operational plan at SMT level. So that's the first tier of the implementation process. Now it does say 3 tiers here. In effect, it's really 2 tiers. 3 tiers makes it sound hierarchical, but what we have is at institutional level, the implementation plan. And then beneath that, or in parallel to that, we have a planning process for schools and directorates. And we have been working quite hard over developing processes over this last month, but over the years, because it's an incremental process, to try and morph together more closely and integrate more closely the school and directorate planning processes, because the schools and directorates work with each other, and we all work towards the same aims and objectives. So what they both have is 3-year rolling plans, and they are live documents. They evolve every year, and they're reviewed on an annual basis by the senior management team as part of what we call the annual planning round. I will come on to that. There's a slide a couple of slides down, which just gives a visual of that process. But at a high level, it's what you see here. You've got the implementation plan and then the school and directorate planning process, which works in parallel to that. This slide here, this is just a visual, just so you can see what the implementation plan looks like. There is more detail which sits behind this, but we have a sheet like this for each of the 20 commitments which make up Aberdeen 2040. So it's quite a comprehensive plan. And we also have another tab as well, I should say, for league table metrics. But just to give you a feel of things, we thought we would include this within the slide deck. So this is under the inclusive theme. This is commitment 5. And what we did was we assigned an SMT lead to lead on the delivery of every commitment made in Aberdeen 2040. And as I touched upon in the previous slide, we asked them all to produce or come up with high-level actions, if you like, spanning the next 4 years that they would want to take forward and deliver on the way to delivering the commitment we've made, each commitment we've made in Aberdeen 2040. And you can see that column there. And then relating to that column or aligned directly to, we asked them all to come up with 1-year activities that they would produce or deliver on an annual basis. And those 1-year activities in effect make up the annual operational plan for SMT. And of course, supplementing all of this, we also have key performance indicators, and we have developed key performance indicators for every commitment made in Aberdeen 2040. So it's quite broad in scope, given we had 20 commitments within the wider strategy. What you can see here is a short description of the key performance indicator. Again, there is more detail that sits behind this, a detailed descriptor, so everybody is absolutely clear on what the KPI measures, what's excluded, and so on. We have baseline figures for every KPI, and we have targets again to 2025. So again, that just gives you a feel. That's one commitment out of a total of 20. And in terms of the KPIs themselves, I'm not going to run through this list KPI by KPI, but this slide here, and I'll flick there, this slide here, between the two, that lists every KPI that we have created against each of the commitments. So creating the KPIs was in itself quite an extensive process. Alholda mentioned the level of consultation we undertook in developing Aberdeen 2040, which I think in no small part contributed to the award we received, because it wasn't just a consultation in standard terms, it was a kind of mass consultation which spanned the best part of the first half of 2019. At least we want to continue in that vein in terms of how we developed the implementation plan, and a key part of that was consulting on the KPIs. So these were shared in their development, and we sought feedback from heads of school, from directors, from Senate in particular, to try and come up with solutions that institutionally people felt that they bought into, and so there was a kind of shared sense of ownership, in the same way that we think there has been with the wider Aberdeen 2040 strategy itself. Obviously, the fact that we made 20 commitments made our life a little bit harder in practical terms, having to come up with 20 KPIs. Some of these KPIs are unique to us. They were developed and tailored specifically to the commitment. So we use, for quite a few of them, staff and student surveys. You can see there the first one uses staff and student surveys, so there's number 6. So they're unique to Aberdeen, and there are others. So number 4, there are high quality accreditations relating to inclusiveness and E&D. They're ideas that we had as ways of measuring the progress that we're making against commitments. Some of them are standard, common KPIs that you would expect to see sector-wide. So national student surveys mentioned there. We also use Times Higher Education Impact Ranking, and further down, I think on the next page, we have, for example, graduate outcomes. So it's a real mix of KPIs. they are diverse, but we hope certainly that they are tailored towards the commitment, and they will provide a valuable mechanism to us in trying to monitor progress against delivering those commitments. But that's what they look like. We will share these slides afterwards so people can have a look through this in more depth. And of course, if anyone has any questions or wants more detail on the KPIs, then of course we would be happy to share that. In terms of the annual process, so I touched upon a few slides ago that we have a two-tiered approach, really. But this is what it looks like in terms of an annual cycle. So this cycle has evolved over time. We like to try and continually improve the process based on what worked really well and what could maybe be improved relative to the previous year's process. And this is where we are now. This is the process as it will work this year, although again, we have been impacted by events. So the planning day that you can see in January is now going to take place in February simply because of COVID numbers. But just to run through it so you get a sense of the annual cycle, every November, December, we will send out documentation to schools and directorates to kickstart the process, and that will include templates for them to update and refine the plans that they developed the previous year. Again, these are rolling 3-year plans. They won't be due until February, March. When we sit down with every school and directorate, they have a meeting with SMT, and that includes not just strategic planning, but budget planning as well. So the annual budgets are agreed as part of this process. Going back, sorry, so I have jumped slightly. We kickstart the process in November, December. In January each year, we will have a planning day, which is in effect an away day, which will include the entire university management group. So that's every head of school, every vice principal, every director, every dean, with some others on top of that. And we haven't done that yet. So the first time, the first planning day event was due to be held on the 28th of this month. It's been pushed back to the 25th of February, but we're hoping that will add real value to the planning process. It will kickstart conversations between different schools and directorates. We hope we'll get a sense of what different priorities are across different areas and where there are shared objectives and so on, and that will feed in to plans going forward. Also in January, something that we kickstarted this week was getting an update on progress from members of the senior management team toward delivery of their commitments under Aberdeen 2040. So if I was going to go back a couple of slides, that would be the 1-year activities. So how are they progressing those halfway through the year, if you like. After that, we have the sit down I've just mentioned with SMT, with every school and directorate in February, March, and then in April, the plans and budgets are finalised for both schools and directorates. This is then approved in June by court via the senior management team and Park, and then in September or October every year, depending on when the court date is, we provide an annual progress report on progress against Aberdeen 2040, which in essence covers all of this. It all falls under that broader umbrella, but it will also include an end of year update on where we are in terms of progress against each commitment. And after that, we would then refresh the annual actions or the annual activities for the next academic year that we've made against each of the 4-year high-level actions included in the plan. So that's what the annual cycle looks like. It's I was going to say it's quite comprehensive. It is. It spans pretty much the whole year, and there's a lot of work that goes into it, but we hope above all that it's effective, and so far there has been a lot of buy-in to it, which obviously within planning we're pleased about, but I think more importantly it means we're more likely to be successful as an organisation in meeting the objectives we set within Aberdeen 2040 if everyone buys into it. And that is that. This is a kind of quick stop whistle tour, if that's the right way of putting it. I think we are well ahead of schedule, Duncan, in terms of the meeting itself. We would maybe have included more slides, but yes, that is it for now. Of course, any questions, then Hulda and I are more than happy to take questions right now or email us. I'll hand back to you, Duncan, but thank you again for inviting us along and for your time.
Okay, many thanks to the two of you. The General Counsel through the Business Committee was very much involved in that consultative process that Hulda referred to in building up the plan. And I personally was delighted to see the point that Hulda made right at the beginning, that you've moved to a 20-year cycle rather than 5 years, which to my mind, for an institution the size and importance of a university, is far too short a timescale. And I think you've managed to combine that 20-year vision with the practicalities that Ian's been talking about just now on what happens each year. If I may answer, if Nicole allows me to ask a question, is it all right for me to ask a question? Yes, okay. Could I ask, perhaps it follows on from the end of Ian's presentation, whether Ian and Hulda have a feel for how successful the university is in meeting these performance indicators. Okay, it's early stages in even a 5-year or a 4-year plan, but do you get the impression that the status of most objectives are red or amber or green? Is there an impression that you can give of that?
Yeah, Hulda, do you want me to say a little bit about that? I'm more than happy to answer that. So last year, things got slightly confused because of the pandemic. Not confused, but stalled for a year. So we established baselines last year for every KPI, and where possible. So that was the starting point. And where possible, we had also a subsequent year's data. One of the issues with having such a diverse mix of KPIs is that they do not all update at the same time. Their annual KPIs, they update at different points throughout the year. I don't have the file to hand, but I think it would not be an issue to share it. I think Hulda and Tracy might keep us right on that. I don't think it would be an issue, but the vast majority, we were either on track or ahead of schedule. I think there were maybe 1 or 2 where there was scope for improvement, but again, very early days. So we were quite pleased with those KPIs where we had that 1-year data to benchmark against the starting point, if you like.
Okay, thanks.
I feel like we made a good start.
Thanks.
A better way of putting it.
That was very much the feel that I was after. Now I see that Mark Lindley Highfield has pointed out that these innovative methods of consulting, building up the plan, are a real credit to the strategy team. Are these things that you will be retaining on an ongoing basis for future strategic reviews? Did you feel that it was successful and you would do it again?
Yeah, I mean, from the planning team's perspective, yes, absolutely. I think it was very successful, but I have to say that the strategy, the approach to the strategy was very much driven by the senior management team in terms of how engaged they wanted to be. I think George and Carl in particular had a very clear vision of wanting it to be a very engaged process. And I think that's the case with every time a university develops and implements a new strategy, it is very much shaped by the senior management team that's in place at the time. But I mean, from our perspective, absolutely, we would hope that this would become the norm. I think it's been very successful, and it's been great to see how engaged staff are and that people actually know the strategy, they know what's in our strategy document, and they feel that it relates to what they do on a day-to-day basis.
And that was a very clear result from the staff survey that you quoted in your presentation, Hulda. Yes, good. And Tracy has put in the chat that the annual report, which, as she mentioned, has now been published on the website, includes an assessment of performance against the KPIs. Now, that has exhausted the questions in the chat. and there's Nicole given the link to the annual report. So many thanks to you both for the presentation, which of course is a repeat and an update of a presentation that you gave to the business committee, which we thought was so interesting and central to the future of the university that it would be worth exposing the wider general council to where you'd got to. Now, we are at item 7 and item 8, which is the question and answer session, and the opportunity for members of the General Council to raise points of interest or concern that haven't been covered by the agenda, maybe pointing the Business Committee to things that we should explore in the next 6 months, a year, which we would be very much alert to. We'd be very keen to do that if we can. So what's the drill, Nicole?
Okay, so hopefully you'll have noticed my colleague Chloe, she's just turned on the controls for everybody's camera and microphone. Now we would ask, please don't switch them on immediately. You should just see them appear at the bottom of your screen. Please leave them off at the moment. We'd only ask that you turn them on when you're called upon to speak if you do raise your hand. So the way we'll do it is, if you have a question you'd like to ask or a comment that you'd like to make on camera, you can do that. All you need to do is raise your hand. So once again, the raise hand icon is found at the bottom of the screen there. It's a little outline of a person with their hand up, and we'll call on people one at a time to speak. But that also doesn't mean that you can't continue to use the chat function. So if something comes into your head that you want to ask or comment on, and you'd rather use the chat, please continue to do that, because we'll be reading that as well. So we'll just give everyone a moment to see if they're wanting to ask on camera, or if they're wanting to ask in the chat, or maybe we don't have any questions. I guess we'll wait and see. But if you do have a question you'd like to ask in person, once again, please just raise your hand, and then we'll just call people one at a time to come forward and speak.
I would encourage you to do so. This is your airtime, and as I said at the beginning, part of my objectives for the afternoon is to involve members of the General Council as much as we can.
Okay, we've got one raised hand. We've got Leslie Alexander. Leslie, do you want to turn on your camera and microphone and you can speak?
Yes, hello, thank you. I'd just like to ask if you can tell us what's happening about Marshall College these days.
Now, perhaps I can answer that. Would it be sensible for me to answer that? Marshall College, as I mentioned in my progress report, Marshall College is divided into two. The front part on Broad Street, which is inhabited now by the City Council, and a very good centre it is for their operations. But at the back, things like the Mitchell Hall, the Anatomy Museum, there's quite a large bit of real estate which is still under university management and which is underused. It's maintained in good state. It's not falling down. It's used, for example, for storage for the museum's bit of the university, but it's not visitable. Indeed, it's not fit to be visited by large numbers of people in the way that many of us graduated in the Mitchell Hall. And the Business Committee, the General Council, but particularly the Business Committee, has felt for some time that that's an underused asset for the university, but more particularly for the city and region. So we were delighted when the university decided to look more carefully, to look intensively at the future of that bit of the estate which they retain an interest in. And we participated in a sort of consultation exercise that was run by the university in the autumn, and we submitted quite a holistic view of what the worth, what the future use of these parts of the building might be. Now, that's being carried forward by a working group which is led by Rob Donaldson, who's I see part of the meeting and may want to add to what I've said. But I think the next step for Rob and his group is to try and breathe life into the ideas that have been contributed by the business committee, of course, but by other folk. And I look forward to hearing concrete proposals, or perhaps good granite ashlar proposals for what further use might be made of the building. But I don't know whether, Rob, you want to come in and elaborate on what I've said?
Yes, thanks, Duncan. You've given a good overview. But I can let the group know that the university several months ago now formed a task and finish group made up of leadership across the university, but also community leaders as well. And this group has been looking at ways that we could repurpose the portion of Marshall College, as you've indicated, that the university still owns. And it really is probably the nicest part, I think, which includes Mitchell Hall. So the task and finish group has met several times. We issued a call for creative ideas within the alumni community as well as the university community. Several really good ideas have come back. The committee is considering them. We're looking for synergies among the ideas that have been submitted. And we're having a meeting at Marshall College in the coming next few weeks in order to review the ideas that have been submitted and see where best they might be located within the building. We plan to submit a report to the senior management team of the university within the next month to a month and a half, and that will outline our recommendations how best to repurpose Marshall College. And then it will be up to the university to make a decision as to what the next steps would be, and we would hope that they would at the very least engage heritage architects and other experts to determine what the costs might be in repurposing Marshall College in the way that the committee has recommended. So it's an exciting time for the university, and I know there's a lot of interest in repurposing Marshall College. It would be a major contribution to the revitalization of the city core. We've met with groups within the city that have revitalized existing heritage buildings. For example, the people at St. Macarius Cathedral, folks at the Art Gallery, as well as the Music Hall. They've all undertaken major renovations of heritage buildings, and we learn from them, and we'll draw on their experience as we develop our plans going forward. But that's a bit of an overview. We hope to have a report, as I say, within the next 6 weeks or so to SAP.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Leslie, do you want to come back on any of what Rob and I have said?
Only one small point. I'd just like to be reassured that the paintings in picture gallery are being looked after.
I think I can give that reassurance absolutely, not only as regards the paintings in the picture gallery, but the historical artifacts that are in Marshall College generally, and the fabric of the building. It's wind and water type. It's properly maintained, and the head of the museums and special collections takes a very strong interest in the quality of the conservation.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Leslie. That's interesting. Are you the Leslie Alexander that was around in Aberdeen at the same time as I was, 68 to 73?
Yes.
Yes, I remember your face. Now, somebody else had their hand up, Nicole.
Yeah, someone did have their hand up, but they've actually lowered it now because they put their message in the chat instead.
Okay, do you want to...
We've got a few things in the chat, so I'll just kind of go through them in order. And if anybody else has anything they want to ask in person, you can just put your hand up and we will get to you after we've handled these ones in the chat. So Nigel has said, I hope Charles Calder's excellent work on the history of the General Council will be made available to buy in printed copies. It's an excellent successor to the good work done by Louise Donald 60 years ago and deserves to be published in a seamless and lasting format.
Right. The answer to that is that I agree. I should explain that Nigel is a predecessor as convener of the committee and is perhaps the godfather of this excellent work on the history of the General Council. But so he has an interest. But I can assure him that that's very much in mind as we prepare the work for publication. Charles Calder writes literally in manuscript, so the first stage is to make it is to put it into digital format, and that's about to be put in hand. A decision hasn't yet been taken about whether and how many copies will be made, but I'm sure, Nigel, that your views will have been listened to. So is Susan Reid the next question? Is that fair, Nicole?
Yeah, I can read it out. So since the university now has a longer term planning scheme, do you think sponsors, donors, research or other projects may also make longer term finance commitments?
It's an excellent question. But who's to answer it? Good for you, Susan. Thank you very much. It may be that we can't answer it in the instance, but what about Tracy wants to say something. Perhaps.
Sorry, just a delay in sticky buttons as it was testing things opening up again. So I think it's a really interesting question. Rob might also have some commentary, but as we have longer term plans and greater visibility on what we are planning to do over a longer time horizon, that tends to be something which is more attractive to donors. I think there are some other challenges for some other groups of funders, in particular charities and some of our research funders who, because of COVID, are going through some difficult financial periods at the moment. So we're seeing some change to the way in which they are putting out calls and the way in which they might be able to make contributions. So it's probably a mixed bag, but in the longer term, the more visibility that we have certainly tends to make it more likely that you will get longer term commitments coming from donors and others.
Thanks very much, Tracy. What about you, Rob? Rob, I should explain, I perhaps didn't introduce him properly. On Marshall is the Director of Development for the university. Do you want to add anything, Rob, to what Tracy has just said?
Yes, I'd be happy to. We're in the process of, and this actually relates to the question that Ann Minto had in the chat as well. We're in the process of planning for the next comprehensive capital campaign for the university. We're very much in the quiet phase right now. A big part of our efforts is identifying prospective donors, working with existing donors, cultivating those relationships with a view to eventual significant financial support for the campaign. But the other major initiative we have underway now is we're building our case for support. This is the document that describes the priorities and plans of the university and the impact that those projects will have, that we anticipate they'll have if they're realized. And so many of those projects are longer term. A number of capital projects such as the revitalization of the King's Quarter, which will be enclosing that quadrangle, the revitalization of the business school. We're hoping to build a home for the interdisciplinary centers at the university. There's a number of capital projects that are very much longer term and require not only philanthropic funding, but also funding from the university. And certainly in the case of the King's Quarter and the business school, there is funding being provided by the university at this time. But many of the projects that will be put forward in the university's fundraising campaign are of a longer term nature in and of themselves. And so we're hoping that we can generate significant support that will help us realize that vision over the longer term.
Okay, thank you very much, Rob. What do we best to do next, Nicole? There are one or two other questions in the chat.
Yes, I'm just coming to those. So just to share a comment that we had from Lynn as well, just saying that they would be much more likely to buy and read a copy of the General Counsel book if it were produced in hard copy rather than electronically. So that's just something to note. This may really have been covered off by Rob's little update there, but I'll just read it out anyway, just in case there's anything to add. Anne is asking, could Rob say more about the areas that he and George will be fundraising for next?
Do you want to add anything, Rob, to the summary you've just given?
Maybe in addition to those capital projects that I mentioned, some major priorities for us are support for postgraduate research initiatives. That's a major priority for the university, and that will be an important part of the campaign, as well as undergraduate scholarship support. A big priority for us will be expanding the support we provide for what we refer to as widening access students. So students who come from disadvantaged, mainly socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds, we really want to expand the level of support that we provide to them. And in addition to that cohort of students, we also want to expand widening access to include anyone who might be marginalized, any student who might be marginalized. So for example, refugees and asylum seekers, students in the LGBTQ community, anyone who is considered to be marginalized. We want this widening access package that will be part of the campaign to really support a very broad base of students, not simply those who are financially disadvantaged. So I would say they're kind of the major priorities at this stage, but we're very much in the process of confirming the case for support, so not everything is finalized just yet.
Can I say further to what Rob was saying a moment ago, how much the business committee has in the past campaigned for that, on that widening access theme. A number of our members, the members of the business committee, or former members of the business committee, were in education, non-university education, one kind or another, and they were very keenly aware of the importance of that work. Nicole, are there any unanswered questions?
There are no unanswered questions in the chat at the moment. We do still have time if anybody has anything they'd like to ask on camera. This is your chance to raise your hand and ask your question, or if you've got anything that's popped into your head, you can put it in the chat. Alternatively, if something comes to you after this that you would like to ask or get some more clarity on, you can always email. I have actually put my email address in the chat there, but I'll put the alumni one as well, and you can contact either of those and we can send your questions on for follow-up. So
okay, many thanks. I was grateful to Anthea, where is she? Anthea Mowat, for the question about guided tours around the Anatomy Museum. Something like that, or a sort of the hidden bits of Marshall would be very attractive to me as a presentation, and I think maybe feasible in a way that an in-person guided tour, I think, would be difficult to arrange, not so much because of COVID, but because of the access problems to the building itself. Now, the final item on the agenda, if there are no other questions, is the notice of the 316th statutory meeting. Now, I can assure the meeting that we won't leave the gap between meetings quite so long as we did this time, for reasons that I explained in my report. In the past few years, we very fruitfully linked the spring meeting of the General Council with the University Annual General Meeting, because that both are designed to showcase, if you like, or to showcase the university to the wider community, but also allow the wider community to ask questions of the university or make comments to the university. So they're analogous kind of meetings, and we've joined them up in the past. I think the business committee would be supportive of the doing that again. But we're a bit in the hands of the university for how they wish to conduct the AGM. I don't know whether, Tracy, you can say anything about future plans, or it may be premature. Plans may not have been laid yet for the university AGM.
Thanks, Duncan. We're still discussing. It's not an annual general meeting in the sense that AGM would normally be used. What we are required or encouraged to do by the Higher Education Code is to hold an open meeting with court, so essentially a meet the court type event. And I think that's one of the aspects we haven't quite worked through as yet, in terms of how we might further develop that aspect of those meetings. So still a work in progress, I'm afraid.
Okay, well, we remain happy to repeat the kind of approach of previous years, if that is convenient to the wider university. I see that there's one further contribution so to complete that item. We've not yet fixed a date for the meeting, but it will be in the spring at some stage. Now, I interrupted myself to point out that there's a question in the chat from Robert C, who's a former inmate of Crombie. Come on, Robert, it wasn't that bad. Is it currently unused? Do you know the answer to that, Nicole, just off the top of your head?
I know that some of it is used. I don't know if it's being used right this moment during pandemic times, but parts of Crombie are used for meetings, seminars. Oh, Tracy's put her hand up. She'll be able to give you a more concise answer.
More authoritative view from Tracy.
Thank you. Yep. So it's quite exciting, actually. There are meeting spaces that are currently used in there, and there's some postgraduate researcher space that's in active use at the moment. But we're currently working to upgrade some parts of that as the first home for our interdisciplinary centre directors. So that's exciting. We'll bring them together in a single space, and hopefully we'll encourage interdisciplinary across the interdisciplinary centres at the same time.
Okay, Robert, was that a satisfactory answer? It seems likely. If there are no more questions, I would thank you very much, Robert, who says yes. If there's no other questions, I would like to thank you all for coming along to this slightly peculiar meeting, and for contributing so helpfully to our thinking, and as ever to Nicole and Chloe, who's remained behind the scenes, for organising the meeting, and to Tracy and Katrina and Halda and Ian for their presentations, which I found fascinating. And I suspect that the fact that very few people have left the meeting while we've been on, I suspect that other folk have found it interesting too. And I look forward to welcoming you back to our next production in the spring. Right, bye.